2 years ago, Todd Bolai initiated our series of lectures called Dante Beyond the Comedy with the Life of Dante. And I think that to some extent you're going back to the life and the moment. I keep on believing you're going back to the moment of the inception of the comedy. I don't know, but I hope so. Dr. Bolai is the author of many important contributions to Dante and Boccaccio studies, including the seminal Boccaccio's Trattatello in Laude di Dante, or Dante Re Sartus, that was Renaissance Quarterly in 1988, and a work really as humble as a chronology that has to some extent changed Dante studies. There's a chronology of the life of Dante in the Dante Encyclopedia, and I know that Todd labored long and hard on that chronology, and it's the backbone of much of your work on Dante since then. So I won't talk any longer. I'll just simply welcome you, Todd, and thank you.
Professor Shepard, thank you for your very friendly and kind introduction. And it's very nice to be here. And to all of you, friends, students, and scholars of the great works of Dante, welcome and thank you for being here. In talking about Dante and Virgil, one is going to be talking about styles. And when one does that, there's always the risk of getting stuck in a kind of futile marshalling and comparison of subjective preferences, which I will try not to do, but about styles we must nevertheless speak. And so where others have feared to tread, I step in. My talk is entitled Dinanzi agli Occhi, the Inferno's first two cantos, and Dante's discovery of Virgil. The first two cantos of Dante's Divine Comedy can be trying. In contrast with the rest of the poem, which abounds in almost tangibly realistic narratives, its opening is so conceptual, symbolic, abstract, condensed, and laconic as to risk putting the reader off. Would instead that the comedy began with the high drama of the episodes of Farinata degli Uberti and Brunetto Latini. Those episodes come to life in the mind's eye and make readers feel that, like Dante himself, they are on the scene and personally involved in its psychology. Who, however, feels the anguish, fear, desperation, hope, doubt, and relief that the comedy's beginning repeatedly asserts, yet fails to show in any but the most mechanical and schematic fashion? Dante's fear of the dark and wooded valley and of the three beasts is urgently asserted. The very word fear occurs 5 times in the poem's first 53 lines. But does the reader feel that fear? The poet says that he is seized by fear just remembering the dark wood, that he is afraid when the lion roars, and that he is filled with dismay when the she-wolf drives him back to the valley. But can we say the poet's feelings become our own? The comedy describes the mountain of purgatory with a preciseness that makes the mountain real. Remote from land in the southern hemisphere, it is at the antipodes of Jerusalem, and its summit rises through the sphere of air, nearly high enough to touch the sphere of fire. How high, though, is the mountain of delight that Dante tries to climb? And just where is it? Where, for that matter, is the forested valley that Dante must pass through to reach the mountain? The setting of the comedy's opening 2 cantos, like the action that takes place there, is primarily symbolic. Once Dante has passed through the gate of hell at the beginning of Inferno 3, his actions become literal actions happening in a real setting and taking place in real time. But in the Inferno's first 2 cantos, persons are largely replaced by personifications, and the real story, namely the vicissitudes that have led the poet to his present pass, remains a backstory which the reader is left to infer from its symbolic recapitulation. What the narrative may gain in synthesis and compression, it loses in substantiality and precision. Canto 1's leopard with the gay spots may be simple enough to imagine, but just how the springtime season and the morning hour are to assist Dante in getting past the beast is not clear, and as the reader pauses to work the puzzle out, the literal leopard ceases to be interesting. Surely no one can think of the lion and the she-wolf as real beasts, notwithstanding how emphatically the reader is told that the lion's roar makes the air resound, or that the she-wolf's face is frightening. And the mountain of delight, for all the sunshine lighting its summit, cannot possibly be a real mountain, because how could a real mountain be what Dante's Virgil calls it, the source and cause of total joy? The problem of the comedy's first 2 cantos is a classic case of the missing objective correlative. The objective correlative, as T.S. Eliot defines it, is a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events, which shall be the formula of the particular emotion to be expressed. Artistic inevitability, which is what the reader fails to find in Inferno 1 and 2, can only be found, according to Eliot, in the complete adequacy of the external to the emotion. Whatever the phases in Dante's life to which the poet means to allude by invoking the dark woods, the leopard, the lion, the she-wolf, and the mountain, they must represent narratives full of stuff, as Eliot puts it with reference to Shakespeare's Hamlet, that the writer could not drag to light, contemplate, or manipulate into art. In Eliot's judgment, Hamlet's bafflement at the absence of an objective equivalent to his feelings is a prolongation of Shakespeare's bafflement in the face of his artistic problem. We must simply admit, Eliot concludes, that in Hamlet, Shakespeare tackled a problem which proved too much for him. Whether the same must be said with respect to Dante and the refractory stuff of the Inferno's first 2 cantos remains to be seen. Nevertheless, what Eliot says about Hamlet must also be said about the comedy's beginning. Probably more people have thought it a work of art because they found it interesting than have found it interesting because it is a work of art. It is from you alone I took the beautiful style that has brought me honor. The first thing Dante does when Virgil has identified himself is to acknowledge his great debt to the pagan Roman poet. Some have thought that Dante here refers to the style of the lyrics collected in his Vita Nuova and of his later Canzoni, but that debt, as the poet makes clear in the Purgatorio, is owed more to his immediate predecessors who versified in the vernacular, to Guido Guinizelli and Guido Cavalcanti, the one and the other Guido whom Dante himself would ultimately drive from the nest. The poet can hardly mean for the comedy's Dante to begin his relationship with the comedy's Virgil by thanking him for the model he may have supplied for the Vita Nuova or the Convivio. Here, at the threshold of his comedy, the only style Dante can be referring to is Virgil's epic style, the style of Virgil's Aeneid, the style of the long, literal, historical, non-allegorical narrative, the style of great and complex characters who move through incidents of high drama, the style of a narrative that discloses the workings of destiny and the meaning of human history, the style, in short, that the rest of Dante's comedy will adopt and make its own. What, however, is the style of the comedy's first two cantos, and why is it not the style for which Dante thanks Virgil and, as shall be seen, thanks him so fittingly? The two cantos of the comedy in which Virgil's character looms largest are the cantos from which Virgil's epic style is almost absent. In Inferno 1 and 2, it is Virgil who sets Dante's journey in motion. It is Virgil who, 1, reveals Dante must travel through hell, purgatory, and heaven in order to be saved. 2, presents himself as Dante's guide for the first two parts of that journey. 3, divulges that he will be replaced by another soul as Dante's guide for the third part of his journey. And 4, explains how Dante's journey is divinely ordained. The Virgil of the first two cantos is not the Virgil of Inferno 23, who rescues Dante from pursuing devils by lifting him onto his chest and sliding down an embankment. And neither is he the Virgil who on purgatory's shore plucks rushes and with them wipes the grime of hell from Dante's face. In these later episodes, the poet finds external actions that are indeed the formula of the emotion they express and which result in a satisfying sensation of artistic inevitability. The Virgil of Inferno 1 and 2, however, is necessarily reduced to being little more than the person assigned to tell Dante, and tell the reader too, of course, what needs to be known. Someone assigned to conduct a kind of briefing and adhere to a prepared script. To be sure, poetry is found in the Inferno's opening cantos, but it is sporadic and fleeting. When Dante asks if Virgil is a shade or a living man, Virgil's answer, "Man no longer, though man I was," is rich with lyric poignancy, but that poignancy is brusquely dispelled as Virgil passes directly to the recitation of his resume. And my parents were Northern Italian, both from Mantua, and so forth. This and other glimmers of sentiment all relate to Virgil's peculiar condition of having died before he could hear the Christian gospel and thus hope for salvation. I lived in Rome in the time of false and lying gods. That emperor who reigns on high because I was a rebel to his law does not want me to come into his city. Oh, happy those whom he elects thereto. These notes of melancholy, however, are merely incidental to the central concerns of Virgil's briefing. They will gain fuller resonance only in retrospect when in Inferno 4, Virgil leads Dante through limbo, Virgil's own place of eternal abode. There, approaching the multitudes who suffer pain without punishment and make the air tremble with unceasing sighs, Virgil explains that they lacked Christian baptism and thus failed to worship God properly. For such deficiencies, and for no other fault, he asserts, we are lost and punished only with this, that without hope we live in desire. In Inferno 4, Virgil's allusion to his fate consort with the drama of the comedy's growing epic narrative, but to the poetry of Inferno 1 and 2, they can but contribute little more than touching lyric effects. The comedy's first 2 cantos may have their poetic moments, but those moments are hardly Virgilian. In Inferno 2, where Virgil relates his encounter with Beatrice, their relationship is cast in terms of the courtly lover and his lady. As, according to courtly convention, the lady commands and the man unhesitatingly and unquestioningly obeys, so when Beatrice, blessed and beautiful, summons Virgil, he asks her to command him. Beatrice's eyes brighten, she speaks with angelic voice, addresses Virgil as a courtly soul, and sends him to rescue her unfortunate friend. "It is I, Beatrice, who bid you go," she tells him. "It is love that moved me, love that makes me speak." This celestial Beatrice is hardly the Venus of Virgil's epic, who comes in disguise to her son, Aeneas, and then reveals her divinity as she departs and drops her shift. There can be no model for Beatrice in the Aeneid, not the submissive but hapless Creusa, and certainly not the deceived and desperate Dido. The only possible model for Beatrice is Beatrice herself, exactly as Dante left her at the conclusion of the Vita Nuova, where he declares he will say no more about her until he can do so worthily. And this is the Beatrice with whom the comedy's Virgil must contend. Thus, Virgil appropriates the language of the courtly poets when he defers to Beatrice's wish. "So pleased am I by your command that I would think it late to have obeyed it already. You need do nothing more than tell me your desire." Virgil's language recalls that of Fouquet de Marseille, the troubadour whose language Dante quotes in his treatise on vernacular eloquence. "So pleased am I by the thought of love," and even more closely anticipates the words that will be given to another troubadour, Arnaut Daniel, in the Purgatorio, "So pleased am I by your courtly request." It is also tempting to note Virgil's being given to use that favorite word of Guido Cavalcanti's, desire. Virgil's Aeneid may have no model for the comedy's Beatrice, but Dante's vernacular poets are ready with suggestions for the comedy's Virgil. Virgil's prophecy of the greyhound is another passage in the comedy's 2-canto prologue that, for at least a moment, rises above the business of laying out the poem's general plan to speak with emotional urgency. After Dante has implored Virgil for help, and Virgil has told him that he must abandon his climb up the mountain and take another course, Virgil's tone grows ominous as he explains why Dante's course must change. Virgil begins by invoking the she-wolf, which, he says, kills whoever tries to climb the mountain. Obviously, the poem does not intend the reader to think that somewhere a literal she-wolf chases climbers down a mountain to kill them, and that Dante was about to become one of her victims. The she-wolf means only what it personifies, and the she-wolf's personification grows as Virgil, expanding on the beast's description, says, "She has a nature so wicked and perverse that she never satisfies her greedy appetite, and after feeding is hungrier than before." Whatever the she-wolf's perversity and hunger make her out to be, whether greed, ambition, or something else, they endow her with a character and motives that differentiate her from the leopard and lion and prepare her to take part in the dramatic vignette framed by Virgil's prophecy. The greyhound that comes to kill the she-wolf, Virgil says, will feed not on land or money, but on wisdom, love, and virtue. Animals do not consume land and money. Political figures do. And in a stroke, a political figure is what the greyhound becomes. Thanks to the transformation of the greyhound into a political reformer who, it is foretold, will be Italy's salvation, the she-wolf becomes the figure of Italy's malaise, representing the sum of whatever ills afflict the Italian commonweal. The she-wolf may remain only symbolic of Italy's ills, but the reader imagines the greyhound as a real human being who pursues the she-wolf through every town until he has driven her back into hell, whence envy first unleashed her. The ease with which the reader imagines the greyhound's progress throughout the Italian peninsula and shares its struggle with the she-wolf is what endows Virgil's prophecy with emotional intensity. That intensity, however, necessarily fades as Virgil resumes describing the plan for Dante's trip. Wherefore, for your benefit, I think and deem that you must follow me, and I will be your guide, etc. Poetic though Virgil's prophecy of the greyhound may be, its style does not come from the Aeneid. Its language of political polemic is drawn instead from the medieval vernacular Sirventese or Cervantese, a genre of lyric poem which, in its Provençal versions, lamented the scarcity of valiant rulers, and in its Italian manifestations, characteristically celebrated the triumphs of the Guelphs while inveighing against the Ghibellines, or vice versa. Among Provençal troubadours familiar to Dante is the great Bertrand de Born, whose Cervantes on the death of Henry Fitzhenry mourns the young English king, compared with whom the generous were mean, and whom Dante cites in his treatise on vernacular eloquence. Surely the troubadour's delight in war has found its way into Virgil's exaltation of the heroes who died in the founding of Rome, and his celebration of the tireless greyhound who will pursue Italy's vicious nemesis through every town. It seems, moreover, quite likely that when Dante wrote Virgil's prophetic words in Inferno 1, he had in mind the anonymous Italian Cervantese, "A desire has come to me," whose tale of bribery and betrayal, of Guelphs and Ghibellines, and of cruel and cowardly leaders seems to mirror Dante's own ravaged Italy, whose lion and greyhound anticipate Inferno 1's symbolic beasts, and whose triplet of rhymes, veltro, peltro, and feltro, greyhound, money, and felt, Dante appropriates for his own prophetic text. The poet, however, who seems most to hover over the comedy's beginning is not Dante's new mentor, Virgil, but his old mentor, Brunetto Latini. Brunetto's didactic Tesoretto, a poem whose influence on Dante's comedy cannot be overstated, is not especially political, but it does begin both with a dedication that celebrates the virtues of a model prince, a prince whose wisdom and knowledge and whose indifference to land, gold, and silver anticipate the Inferno's reformer greyhound, and with an account of how the Tesoretto was occasioned by the defeat of Brunetto's Guelph party in Florence and his consequent exclusion from the city. Brunetto's chagrin at finding his political ideal, a city in which all should pull together on one rope of peace and good conduct, overturned by those who impose their selfish aims on the body politic and leave it a land broken by party, is paralleled by Dante's distress when he is confronted in Inferno 1 by the threat of the ravenous lion and the relentlessness of the she-wolf who has long made people live in misery. Besides offering Dante its political notes, the Tesoretto also shows how, by using a vernacular narrative to offer instruction to the unlearned, a poem can testify to the goodwill of its author, precisely what Dante wanted his own works to do for him. Dante had already been influenced by Brunetto's Trésor, the compendium of encyclopedic knowledge in French prose, of which Brunetto meant the Tesoretto to be a briefer version. The Convivio, Dante's projected but unfinished summary of knowledge in Italian prose, by presenting a message that principally intends to lead men to learning and to virtue, conspicuously follows the Trésor's model. It is no surprise, then, that the same logical style that characterizes the Trésor and the Convivio marks Beatrice's explanation in Inferno 2 of why she has no fear of being harmed by descending into hell. One must fear only those things that have the capacity to cause people harm, but other things not, because they inspire no fear. Like both Brunetto's Tesoretto and his Trésor, Dante's Convivio was composed in exile and was intended, among other things, to ingratiate the author with those who might help him, whether in securing an honorable return to his city or in protecting and supporting him during his banishment. Dante's problems with the Convivio help to explain, however, why Brunetto's example was unable to lead where Dante ultimately needed to go. Setting out in the Convivio's Book 4, the last written of the 15 books Dante planned, to examine the true nature of nobility, Dante cites the opinion of the last of the Roman emperors, Frederick II, and immediately finds himself engaged in a long digression on the origin of imperial authority. He demonstrates why single rule for the world is desirable, and then discusses what makes the authority of the Roman prince logically supreme. The Romans' right to rule the world, Dante contends, came not from military victory, but from divine providence. And to support his argument, he quotes Virgil. And in this, Virgil concurs in the first book of the Aeneid when, speaking in the person of God, he says, "To them," that is to the Romans, "I set no bounds, either of space or of time. To them I have given empire without end." Here, Dante discovers the idea that will dominate his political thinking to the end of his life, namely, that the Roman Empire was divinely ordained to bring peace to a unified world and thereby make it fit to receive the Christian gospel. With this, the Convivio is wrenched from its course, in that up to this point, its guiding premise has been that the free exercise of human reason can lead to earthly happiness. Now, this premise is overturned by the Aeneid's story of human submission to a divine plan, a plan that need only be revealed, not understood, a plan that in and of itself endows history with transcendental purpose. Until now, the Convivio's references to Virgil have all been, like this one, brief quotations made to support a point. None of them, however, has boldly set forth, as this quotation does, a new and revolutionary argument. The Convivio's subsequent references to Virgil further differ in that they give detailed summaries of various episodes from the Aeneid, and thereby suggest a familiarity with the work not evident in the earlier quotations. In his fundamental essay on the unfinished Convivio and Dante's rereading of the Aeneid, Ulrich Leo observes that the earlier quotations may not even have been found by reading the original, but might have been selected from one or the other of those collections of maxims and aphorisms by which the remnants of classical poetry were made palatable to the medieval students of Latin. Leo speculates that Dante was prompted to reread Virgil, or indeed to read him in full for the first time, when, as he was preparing the Convivio's discussion of how nobility develops through the 4 ages of human life, he wanted to utilize what at that time was considered to be Virgil's allegorical presentation of the same subject. In any case, it is clear from the quotations that follow the Convivio's declaration of Dante's novel idea regarding empire that Dante has acquired a new and fervent enthusiasm for Virgil. Our greatest poet, he calls him, in anticipation of the passage in the Paradiso, where Virgil is called our greatest muse. This highest poet, he calls him, in anticipation of the passage in the Inferno, where Virgil is honored as the highest poet. Leo may be right about the immediate cause of Dante's investigation, but it was a whole set of biographical circumstances which made the poet's fresh examination of Virgil a life-changing event. Little affected Dante's literary activity so significantly as his political experiences, and those experiences were extensive. From the time Dante was 17 and watched Florence's priors take up residence across the street from where he lived, to the time when he finally broke with his fellow exiles, he compiled a record of civil and military service arguably unsurpassed by any other poet. In 1289, Dante fought in the great patriotic battles of Campaldino and Caprona. In 1295, he enrolled in a guild in order to qualify for political office and participate in public affairs. Over the next 7 years, Dante served in at least a dozen official posts, including membership on the Board of Priors, his city's highest office. It was while Dante was Florence's ambassador to Rome that Corso Donati overturned Florence's government, unleashed his thugs on political opponents, and drove out the white Guelph leadership, of which Dante was a prominent part. In exile, Dante's political activities grew even more intense. As the whites' chancellor and diplomatic representative, he relentlessly negotiated with Florence's blacks, with Ghibellines willing to support the whites' cause, and with the papal legate, commissioned with making peace between the Guelph factions and securing the whites' return to Florence. In 1303, while Dante was in Verona to petition its rulers for help, the whites suffered a significant military setback. Dante advised them to let matters mature and wait out the winter before mounting further campaigns. The frustrated whites now blamed Dante for counseling patience and not trying harder to secure Verona's help. Embittered by black intransigence, Ghibelline selfishness, papal duplicity, and the fecklessness of his fellow whites, Dante resigned and prepared to go it alone. At a stroke, Dante was now not only no longer a white, he was no longer of wealth. Having had his dedication to party and city so cruelly belittled, it is small wonder that Dante was now ready to set aside Brunetto's notion of being born to one city and to urge people to join him instead in unanimous obedience to a benevolent and universal government. Small wonder that the Aeneid's message of learning justice, revering the will of heaven, governing everyone under one law, establishing peace, humbling the arrogant, and sparing the meek, was one that Dante was ready to make his own. If Dante found the Aeneid's message compelling, he found its way of conveying it even more so. Even though the Aeneid states its message explicitly when Jove tells Venus the purpose he has for her son, or when Aeneas's father reveals how Rome's destiny will culminate in the triumph of Augustus, it promotes its message principally through the example of its characters. Rome's divine destiny is not argued, it is shown by Aeneas's escape from the destruction of Troy, by his dutiful renunciation of Dido, by his safe arrival in Italy, by his successful journey to the realm of the dead. Aeneas's guide to the underworld is not a symbolic abstraction like nature, who guides Brunetto in the Tesoretto. Aeneas's guide is the flesh and blood Sibyl, who grows pale and raves, insists and yields, warns and reassures. Nor is the Aeneid Dante's convivio. It is not truth by way of prose treatise. It is propaganda by way of poetic narrative. And it is in the Aeneid that Dante finds a recipe for the work that will proclaim his own new message. What the Convivio sought to demonstrate by way of philosophical argument, namely that human reason can achieve the rewards of right conduct, the comedy will have Virgil enact in its narrative. Dante's guide will not have to symbolize something, but will simply be who he is and act accordingly. Unlike the canzoni in Dante's Convivio, the comedy can be understood without being interpreted allegorically. As Leo says, the comedy, though containing many allegories, is not an allegorical poem. At the beginning of the comedy, however, Dante could not set Brunetto aside. Aeneas's destiny is simpler than Dante's. Rome will be founded, but at the expense of toil and sacrifice. Aeneas visits the realm of the dead not to learn why his mission is divinely willed, but simply to learn that it is. It is not given to pagans, either in Virgil's poem or in Dante's, to understand the mystery of human destiny. In Dante's universe, however, which privileges the contemplative life over the active, the understanding of human destiny is heaven's reward. As his poem's protagonist, Dante visits the realms of the dead not just to learn what justice is, but to learn how and why it is distributed as it is. And as his poem's author, Dante bears witness to that privileged experience and proclaims the message with which he has been entrusted. What authorizes such a journey and sets it in motion is not simple and must be explained. Inferno 1 and 2 are like the synopsis in a theater program, which is meant to outline the action to come without compromising the play. Hence, the synthetic condensing symbols of the highway, woods, mountain, and beasts, the abbreviated and stylized interactions between Dante, Virgil, and Beatrice, and the pared down narratives of St. Lucy and the Virgin Mary. Brunetto's allegorical technique helps get Dante's non-allegorical poems started, and the rough mixture of styles in the first two cantos must be at least partially attributed to the precedence the poet gives to laying a proper foundation for the comedy's narrative. It is ironic that Inferno 15, which is primarily dedicated to Dante's encounter with Brunetto, is a canto from which Brunetto's style is absent, and in which Virgil's style reigns supreme. The complicated emotional relationship that reverberates throughout Dante's meeting with Brunetto is reminiscent of Aeneas's encounter in the underworld with Dido, and the tenderly filial character of Dante's and Brunetto's exchange recalls Aeneas's reunion with the shade of his father Anchises. Brunetto showed Dante how one serves a republic, how a statesman uses logic and rhetoric, and how a vernacular writer promotes the public good. In short, as Dante says to Brunetto, how a man achieves lasting fame. And, Dante adds, how grateful I am for all of this my tongue must declare as long as I live. However, the democratic, rational aims of Brunetto's instruction have lost their currency. However, the democratic, rational aims of Brunetto's instruction have lost their currency in the poet's evolution away from his teacher. What Dante knows now, namely that people must expect a leader who will bring radical change, he has learned from Virgil. Brunetto, who says that, had I not died so soon, I would have counseled you in your work, is naturally curious to know who now serves as Dante's guide. Not wishing to offend his old mentor, Dante declines to give Virgil's name. It is just someone, he says, who yesterday morning appeared to me and by this road now leads me home. It is not only Brunetto who is unable to understand why Virgil should be Dante's guide. Among the heretics in Inferno 10, Dante encounters Florence's great Ghibelline leader, Farinata degli Uberti. In the animated exchange of partisan boasts that Dante trades with the Ghibelline hero, the poet creates what is perhaps his most Virgilian character. Dante had no chance to know the historical Farinata. Farinata died in 1264, and Dante was born in 1265. However, in Virgil's Mezentius, Aeneas's implacable adversary, Dante found a template for the arrogant, bloodthirsty, unbelieving Farinata. Mezentius, the scorner of the gods, whose savage rule induces his Tuscan subjects to destroy his palace and drive him into exile, must surely have resonated with the Dante who grew up amid the rubble that remained from the destroyed houses of the exiled Ubertis. It is a short step from Mezentius, who acknowledges his crimes and his people's hatred, to Farinata, who remorsefully recalls his harshness towards Florence, that noble city toward which I was perhaps too cruel. The Aeneid's influence is especially evident in Dante's construction of a narrative that persuades not only with dialogue, but with psychologically revealing gestures. The erect, unflinching Farinata, the great-souled one who, Dante says, altered not his countenance, nor moved his neck, nor bent his side, recalls Mezentius, who, Virgil says, stands unafraid, a motionless hulk, awaiting his great-souled adversary. Virgil's deftly interrupting the duel between Aeneas and Mezentius to insert Aeneas's duel with Mezentius's son anticipates Dante's interrupting his exchange with Farinata to insert Dante's dialogue with Cavalcante de Cavalcanti regarding Cavalcante's son Guido. Not only does the interruption create suspense, it allows the poet to introduce a touching scene which bears directly on the canto's double subject, politics and religious belief. When Guido's father recognizes Dante, he is puzzled to find that Guido and Dante are not journeying together. If you go through this blind prison by height of genius, where is my son, and why is he not with you? I do not come here on my own, Dante tells him. He who is waiting there shows me the way, he whom perhaps your Guido scorned. As a rationalist and an unbeliever, Guido could never think that religious piety like that of Virgil's Aeneas was needed to visit the dead. And besides, for an inveterate Guelph like Guido, Virgil's imperial politics were a non-starter. The very reasons for which Guido rejected Virgil were why only Virgil could be Dante's guide. Brunetto offered Dante civic values, but without empire. Guido offered Dante civic values, but without religion. Virgil offered Dante empire and religion, but of course the religion he offered was wrong. Only Beatrice, the true praise of God, as St. Lucy calls her in Inferno 2, can help Dante complete his journey, because only she is qualified, as the Virgin Mary and Lucy understand, to induct Dante into the mysteries of Christian salvation. Because it is understood from the very beginning that Virgil cannot complete the journey that Dante must make, Dante changes and amends his guide as necessary, either to bring his paganism into conformity with the comedy's Christian scheme, or to marginalize it where such conformity cannot be established. When, in Inferno 2, Dante questions why he should visit the dead, he tells Virgil that, by contrast, Virgil's account of a living Aeneas's visit to the underworld does not seem implausible to a thinking person, especially since, by means of this journey that you credit him with, he learned things that were the cause of his victory and of the papal mantle. Of course, Virgil's Aeneid says nothing about papal mantles. But this does not mean that what Aeneas learned in the underworld concerning the empire did not also imply Rome's becoming the seat of the universal church. The Christian nature of the empire was not given to Aeneas or to Virgil to understand. Virgil already is what he is for Statius, the Roman poet whom Virgil and Dante meet in Purgatory, the poet who says he was converted to Christianity by the messages he found in Virgil's poetry, messages which Virgil himself could not understand. Virgil was, as Dante's Statius famously says, like one who goes at night and carries the light behind him, so that he does not help himself, but lights the way for those who follow. It was Dante's realization that Virgil had not grasped the full meaning of his own message that gave Dante the license to accommodate Virgil to his own purposes. A telling instance is where in Inferno 1, the poet has Virgil say that the greyhound will be the salvation of that humble Italy for which the ancients gave their lives. Humble is the same Latin word that the Aeneid uses to mean low-lying when Aeneas relates how the wandering Trojans caught their first glimpse of low-lying Italy. What is affectionate, however, in Aeneas's characterization of Italy's unforbidding coastline becomes a moral judgment when Dante has his Virgil use the word humble to mean an Italy that is submissive to the reforming greyhound and the complete opposite of the haughty Ilium whose conflagration Aeneas fled. Even more interesting is the Virgilian quotation that is amended in the passage where Dante sees Virgil for the first time, as the poet tells how the she-wolf drove him down the mountain. He says that while I was rushing downward, before my eyes was offered one who for long silence seemed faint. In the quoted passage from Virgil's poem, Aeneas relates how I was rushing furiously when my mother, never before so dazzling to my eyes, offered herself to sight. The repeated words, rushing, before, eyes, and offered, make the Virgilian reminiscence unmistakable. But what Virgil says is not what Dante says at all. Aeneas's mother is unmistakable, while the comedy's Virgil is so faint that Dante must ask him whether he is a shade or truly a man. What Dante has done is to alter a single letter in the Virgilian original so that by the magic of Latin grammar, never before so dazzling to my eyes becomes before my eyes not very distinct. By amending Virgil's original text, Dante is able to say that the true Virgil has been silent for a long time, silent to the world because Virgil has been available to most readers only in scattered excerpts, and silent to Dante in that until now, Virgil has just been standing there, indistinct and saying nothing. When, however, the author of the Convivio wanted to learn about the source of Rome's authority, he availed himself of Virgil's Aeneid and asked. Suddenly, the Virgil who had been so indistinct now spoke clearly. Suddenly, not only a prescription for Italy's reform, but the answer to Dante's question of how to construct and plot his own great project, his sacred poem, lay right there in Virgil's volume, Dinanzi agli Occhi, before his very eyes. Thank you.
I'm sure there are questions.
Don't be shy.
That was incredible.
What?
I mean, incredible. It was totally incredible. It was fantastic.
So we have one taker. That's good. Well, Ben.
It's hard for me to formulate a question because of the richness of the material you presented, but would I be, it seems that Dante had a revelatory experience in reading Virgil. And it's not clear to me how much of that revelation was political and how much was stylistic, and how much was religious. Perhaps it was a combination of all three.
And abundantly so, I think.
Which is no mean feat, given the intrinsic contradictions in these areas. But this leads me to a question that may be a little off the beaten path of your presentation, but I'm curious and confused. Did Dante have a religious conversion experience? Was he always so religiously inclined? Because he seems to be in marked contradistinction to, say, Guido Cavalcante and, that's my question.
Let's just presume that we acknowledge Dante's sincerity, that the message he means is sincerely meant, and lay that aside, and then question whether the poem was something very cleverly and carefully constructed with all these interlocking details. Of course, I mean, you know, there are gaps and disagreements in it, but on the whole, it's this remarkable architecture. Or is it something that came from some real religious experience, some kind of mystical experience where he felt he had traveled someplace and had seen things? I mean, I think it would be hard to say that all the people in the Middle Ages all the saints and you know, claimed such experiences were just plain making them up and fooling us. So, I don't know. I don't think we can know, and then the question becomes, if we do know that Dante really felt that he had been lifted up body and soul into the supernal realms after having visited the underworld and this mountain, would it make our experience of the poem any different? Would it enhance its meaning and its power, either as a work of literature or, as Dante, I'm sure, most sincerely hoped, as an appeal to a spiritual, social, political awakening in the society that the readers found themselves in? I don't know.
The appeal of the poem would seem to be completely dissociated from the author. The poem stands on its own merit.
That's right. And well, that's exactly right. So that indeed, and the question that you ask, and the question that we really all are very curious about, let's confess it, is a question about the author, not a question about the poem, ultimately. And that's why its significance is thus circumscribed.
And so, again, speaking about the author, we have basically in Dante's life, Beatrice preceding Virgil as a major figure.
That's right.
In terms of his imaginative, in terms of his religious conception.
Yeah.
She's in the vehicle, but Virgil comes in with the perhaps, you know, this is something he's growing in his conception that it results in.
I must think that biographically, Virgil was Dante's way back to Beatrice, and that this, you know, just as she is in the poem, you know, the tripartite revelation that Dante's encounter with the Aeneid involved, as you so well put it. Each one of those, you know, the political revelation is a profound one. You know, that politics, that an empire is divinely ordained by the true God. But of course, Virgil understands that it's divinely ordained. He just doesn't understand what the true God is. So that's sort of that extremely important, potent revelation is immediately undercut by its pagan context. Then we have the stylistic discovery, and you have it's in a different language. It's in a language that now only the learned understand, and often the people who most need to hear this message, the movers and shakers in society, the political leaders, they don't know Latin. They have their notaries and chancellors drawing up their letters and legal documents for them, but they don't fall asleep at night nodding over Boethius's writings. And then, of course, the religious one is also a, you know, it's true and untrue, through and through. So that's what makes, and it's by virtue of this hybrid or paradoxical nature that Virgil has for Dante, that he's such a rich resource, because not only can he be molded and changed and amended, he has to be in order to fit into this scheme. So from the very beginning, we're embracing Virgil as like the one from whom I got it all. And I don't think, well, it has, of course, the exaggeration that any compliment has in it. But I think deeply, it is not an exaggeration. I mean, I think Dante really feels this is the source of what I'm going to try. And it's not Guido Guinizelli, it's not even Guido Cavalcanti, it's not Bertrand de Born or anyone else. And yet, from the very beginning, he has to be putting Virgil in his place. I mean, before you get to the end of Canto 1, we already learned that he's only a 2/3 guide. He's not a 100% guide. He's just a 66 2/3% guide. May I hear Vincent first?
Thank you for these rich reflections, which are the fruit of your own lungo studio e grande amore. And I wonder if in the same passage I could draw your attention to the word fonte, which comes first, and stilo, we would say stile, which comes afterwards. How do you situate those two words?
What was the first word?
Fonte, quella fonte.
Right.
How would you situate his use of those two words with respect to Virgil in relation to one another? What distinction, if any, would you make?
So this is the
Virgilio,
font
yeah.
that dispenses
Right.
such a great river of speech.
Right.
I think that's what-
Lo stilo.
What's that?
Di cui ho tratto lo stilo.
That's right. And you are the only one from,
Right.
you say solo colui,
Yeah.
da cui io tosi, lo bello stilo che m'ha fatto onore. Well, maybe I don't understand your question, but I think those are complementary
Go ahead.
things for Dante to say. I mean, for the character Dante.
Could you relate them to the concept of style that you have used this evening?
Well, I think an epic narrative, a long narrative with many characters, with many incidents, many stories, which in and of themselves engage our attention and entertain us and detain us and sneak up on us and instruct us despite our entertainment, and carry a message. I think that's, where else was Dante going to see that in an antecedent of his? In Scripture, perhaps, you know, in Kings and Chronicles, in the Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles. I mean, where there's the question of how, so long prose narratives, there were the chivalric narratives that circulated in Tuscan vernacular versions, translations, versions really, strict or not. I wonder.
And the Romance epics, which also were, this is all from France, Romance epics as well.
Well, do you think though, let me ask you why, Dante is at pains to put that all in its appropriate and very limited category in Inferno 5, when he's dealing with Paolo and Francesca and his own previous devotion to this literature and to its attendant values.
Narrative love literature, but not epic.
Okay.
No. And in this line, he's saying, "Che mi ha fatto onore." It's the style he took from Virgil is the one that has done him, Dante, honor. And what has Dante written before that? These little lyric poems. So I'm skeptical a bit, or I would want to know more. And I guess one of the things I want to know for you is to what degree is that use of the word style, the use that one would find in the rhetorical treatises that Dante knew, and to what degree is it something more general like the Fonte?
Well, now you're asking for the.
I would think what you described was more like the Fonte.
For the speculation that I didn't want to let run ride in my talk, but I.
Right. And
I'm guessing.
I appreciate that.
I think that Dante had what's amazing about the comedy is that Cantos went in to give you the outline for it. All right. Along the way, it changes course slightly here and there, or what is it? Circle 8 becomes Male Bolge, which becomes 10 circles, and now Minos is wrapping his tail around himself to indicate how many circles of hell the sinners goes. How does that take care of the Male Bolge? But apart from those details, he's got the whole thing very well conceived. So I think that attendant on that moment of revelation in his encounter with Virgil was as I said in the paper, it suggested to him a way of doing what he felt he most needed to do, which was to tell some important, urgent truth. It immediately rendered the convivio and the De Vulgari Eloquentia and all that just inadequate, totally. And he knew that Virgil was going to be his guide, and in many ways his template. And so when he says, "You are the one from whom I took the style that has done me honor," I think Boccaccio is quite right when he says, "Qui l'autore fa solecesimo," makes an intended mistake by saying that what is going to happen has happened already. I think he's confident, as only Dante can be, supremely confident, that our hubristic Dante that we're always having to deal with. I mean, like, how can he say these things? How can he make these claims? They're sacrilegious. Anyhow, he believes before he writes the poem that the poem is going to come, and it may also have been in the wake of some personal devotional religious experience as well that came, in some adjacent time to his encounter with Virgil. But these all get kind of locked together at a certain point in his life, and then just everything takes a hard turn for him, and he's off to the races and never looks back. Well, he does fall in love with the lady with the goiter, and sometime after between Cantos 7 and 8. I think his embrace of Virgil as being the answer, or allowing Dante to find the answer. I think that's more it. Not that Virgil is the answer, but that Dante's encounter with Virgil gives Dante the key to the answer that he's seeking, and he knows that he's going to be writing in a style that will owe all kinds of stuff to Virgil and so much less to Guido. And you find Guitoni, all the way through. I don't know, just Dante was never shy about it.
How do you mean you find Guitone all the way through?
Oh well, and I felt like I felt like a fallen body falls. I mean, those kind of word plays, those little cleverness things that he was always inveighing against. So
urban style, remember?
Yeah, right. The urban style.
Much.
The local
line.
Well, I don't know.
Or municipal.
These are the imponderables. So that's
style.
why it's fun to think
Municipal
about.
style.
And and you can see that I took my liberties with interpretations. I mean, I think that Guido's disdain is indeed for Virgil and not for Beatrice. I think that and the crux of the style that has done me honor when it hasn't done him honor yet. What's the meaning of that? I've come to my I've made peace with those questions, at least for the moment, and called them the way I see them.
I wanted to say that your reading of Canto 10 is really fascinating. It almost becomes an interrogation of Dante. Is the pilgrim guilty of some kind of civic heresy in this?
The whole thing is
It's just.
the whole thing is the whole comedy is a self-examination, isn't it? I mean.
But just that crux. I mean, here he is in the circle of the heretics, which is already a very strange circle and not Aristotelian, and encountering these two unlikely, although related, characters. I mean, you set it up beautifully, but brought to bear so many issues that I had never.
Well, here, again, speculating about Dante's biography, don't you wonder sometimes whether in palling around with Guido and his boys, and sitting in these late all-night bull sessions about religion and the sort of things that young men talk about, don't you think he may have dallied with the notion of materialism and
Of course. It's all over.
Yeah.
It's all over the convivio. I mean, not all over, but it's there.
Right.
Yeah. No, it makes me want to go back and start again with Canto 10. And just that it's there, that he needs to bring it in at that point is really.
It's a river in which the lamb can wade and the elephant can swim.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.